I'm joined by Emerald Clinics right now, and Emerald is a clinical services and healthcare technology company focused on the provision of care for patients clinically determined to exhausted conventional therapies and who may be suitable for cannabinoid-based therapies. In addition, Emerald uses technology to capture clinical data that can be used to generate clinical evidence related to the safety and efficacy of unregistered medicines. On the line, we have Dr. Michael Winlo, who is the Managing Director of Emerald Clinics. Michael has extensive experience in leading high-growth teams. Prior to Emerald, he served as CEO of Linear Clinical Research, and prior to that, lived and worked in Silicon Valley, working for Palantir, helping major healthcare institutions in the US and UK solve complex data integration and analysis challenges. Over to you, Michael. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Laura. Appreciate it. And thanks to everyone on the line for sitting here on your Friday afternoon. Appreciate it. Pleasure to talk about this company with you all. So let's get started. So Emerald Clinics, as Laura mentioned, we are a clinical services and data services company, and that makes us quite different from your usual medical practice. So while we have a team of clinicians, we've got 16 GPs and 2 specialists on staff. We provide clinical care across 4 locations around Australia to patients with unmet needs. We also have in the background a data team with extensive experience who are there to help us capture, organize, and curate the clinical evidence that we're gathering, because that is of tremendous value to a number of evidence buyers who are looking for insights into their drug development, looking for feedback on how their products are faring in the real world. And that evidence is a really key part of our business, which we'll explain more about. But this combination of a clinical service designed to optimize the quality and utility of the clinical evidence paired with a technology backbone is really what makes us unique and what makes us so excited to be moving ahead. We have an evidence gap challenge that we're applying our approach to for cannabinoid medicines right now. And we've all seen the SASB or the Special Access Scheme numbers, maybe around medicinal cannabis. Prescriptions have been rising, but really, if you look into the numbers, there's only a small number of clinicians prescribing the medication. There's a number of reasons for that. But you could think of where the market is at in terms of maturity, in terms of penetration of medicinal cannabis medicine, as being only amongst the early adopters. A vast majority of clinicians, for a vast majority of patients, are still not able to access this drug, or not able to, or it's not widely prescribed, not as much as perhaps it could be. And there's an evidence gap that sits in the middle here, preventing the early majority of clinicians from engaging with this medication. And there are a number of contributing features to this evidence gap, in that without the appropriate clinical evidence behind the appropriate and safe use of these treatments, major regulators like the TGA, but let's expand that to the FDA in America or the EMA in Europe, they're not authorizing these medications. They're not allowing a producer or a drug development company to market claims of benefit about their treatments. So regulators are forcing these treatments to be available only through special access pathways. The other challenge here is, without the evidence of cost effectiveness, major payers or health insurers are also not fronting the bill for these treatments. So they're very, very expensive for patients, hundreds of dollars a month on average for a typical treatment regime. The other challenge here is, without evidence on what product to give which patient and for how long and what to watch for, clinicians are very apprehensive about using these treatments widely. And until we have the appropriate clinical evidence, the appropriate product-specific clinical evidence about these treatments, we're going to be in this situation we are today, where access is quite difficult and appropriate use is unclear about these treatments. So we need an answer. We need to do clinical studies to open this market up. And so most people think of clinical trials, if you've invested in biotech before, you know there's a very long timeline. It's high risk, extremely expensive to do clinical trials and have success. The traditional model can last many, many years, tens of years in some situations, can cost hundreds of millions of dollars. The average drug is estimated to cost $2.5 billion to get from discovery to patient. And it's a long and protracted way of understanding whether medicines work or not. And so in response to that, regulators and drug development companies have been looking for alternative sources of evidence to drive their drug development programs. And the term that we are really familiar with and we promote heavily is real-world evidence. And that is evidence collected outside of the trial apparatus, in the real world, in clinical practices, in care delivery. That data can be used as evidence to support claims for drugs, and it can help with drug development as well. And you can use real-world evidence to accelerate your approval timelines. You can monitor real-world evidence, the use of your drug out in the real world, to pick up secondary indications or additional indications for your therapies. And also there's a requirement to do post-market monitoring of all drugs in the market as well. And real-world evidence can certainly help with that. There is a huge surge in the use of real-world evidence at the FDA to support registration. And here's an article from just a few weeks ago pointing out that the use of real-world evidence has surged from 19% to 47%, close to 50%, and expected to rise. And so as the digitization of healthcare becomes more prevalent, there is more opportunity to organize that data into real-world evidence to support the evaluation of not just drugs, I should say, but really a whole range of treatments and interventions. And not surprisingly, in response to this growing interest in real-world evidence, major regulators are writing clear guidance on how drug developers can use it to support their drug development programs and get registration. Big Pharma are investing heavily in real-world evidence, including Australia's own CSL. An article in the Financial Review from a couple of months ago is worth a read. You can see that they're taking a deep interest in this in their own treatment development. The article actually references Emerald's listing as well. And as a consequence, there is opportunity to serve this market, to specialize in this space, and companies can generate quite valuable exits. Probably the most well-known is Flatiron Health, acquired by Roche a couple of years ago for 1.9 billion US. And the chief medical officer of Flatiron is now the deputy principal commissioner at the FDA, where her remit is to cover two main things. It's to write the guidance on real-world evidence, and it's also to help regulate cannabinoid treatments, which we believe bodes well for the space that Emerald is operating in, clearly. Now, to explain maybe a little more about real-world evidence and its value, and kind of how Emerald's setup really plays well into this, we can think of data as really having two primary qualities of interest to drug development, and that is making sure your data is extremely high quality, and does it have a high external validity? Can you take insights from this data and apply it to broad populations? Now, trial data, as we all know, has exceptional high quality. Its primary driver for its expense is all of the data management, the quality checks, and the review that goes into making trial data exceptionally high quality. The trade-off, though, is that often it comes at the expense of the validity of that data, in that you have to create your trial with such tight rules around who gets the drug and who doesn't, around what clinical features you're going to allow into the trial and which ones you're going to exclude, that the population in those studies doesn't often look like the real-world patients that doctors see every day in their practice. And so the trade-off here is for great quality, you trade off validity. Now take that with your typical real-world evidence sources, the kinds that Flatiron have been working with and other companies. This data has great external validity. It's very believable. It's on real patients. It's collected from doctor practices. But because it's collected from medical practices, the data quality can be really poor. Often these are handwritten notes or narrative clinical assessments where pulling out structured, high quality evidence is quite difficult. And that's what makes this such an interesting challenge. There are many other data sets as well that one can get hold of, pharmacy claims, data from other labs, but they also often have quality issues and validity challenges because they're not generated with the intent to be used as clinical evidence. So clearly there's an opportunity here to sit up in that top left quadrant, and Emerald's whole business model has been designed to accomplish that. So that's why we manage a clinical service of independent physicians. That's why we have procedures and practices in our clinics, which makes the clinical care experience, it's a longer experience. We spend more time with patients. We ask a broader set of questions. We perform more assessments because we're really focused on generating high quality clinical evidence about those patients. That's why we have a data service teams who knows how to manage that information and turn it into the kind of clinical evidence that regulators will accept. And that there's a real harmony to that, which really hasn't been done before. That makes us really so bullish about this opportunity. And so that would explain, again, to go back to this diagram, really the key features here. We have a clinical team, as I mentioned, 16 GPs now, all with good clinical practice training, which means they're all trial-ready clinicians. We're independent of all producers and sponsors, and which means we take no inducements or kickbacks from any producer. Our only relationship with producers really comes in the form of evidence transactions or insights as a service, and we prefer it that way. We have over 120 products now on our formulary, so you can see that there's a huge number of diverse products out there, and all of which fall short of the typical evidence requirement, and none of which are formally registered with the TGA yet. Another important thing to mention, though, is the treatments that we use are often much lower doses than recreational cannabis. Sometimes we get the question, what's the difference between medicinal product and the recreational product? Well, if you're talking about the smoked form of cannabis, you can get many times greater dose that comes on quickly and dissipates quickly as well. And so we're not talking about those products. We're talking about pharmaceutical grade, medicinal quality cannabinoid medicine that is only prescribed. And what that means is that we can have really high confidence that what we're giving patients is what they're taking, is of consistent quality. So therefore, the clinical evidence we can gather from those patients it can be much more trusted. And our data service team, as we mentioned, we really engage with our patients in this process. We think of them as partners. They're co-creating this evidence with us. And of course, we're giving them feedback on how they're doing as well. And of course, the insights that we get are so exceptional. We can have a very unique perspective on which treatments are working and for which patients, and certainly a much deeper understanding of the safety profile of these treatments as well. Basic data flow looks something like this. We have a patient with unmet medical needs. Most of the time we require a referral to our clinic so that we can ensure that these patients have failed standard of care or are not suitable for the standard treatments that are available. We have a clinical review, which is face-to-face. Of course, now in the age of COVID, almost all our consultations, if required, can be shifted to telehealth. We've got an excellent telehealth platform for that, which allows us to consult with patients with no loss of data integrity, which we're really pleased with. We invite the patient also to complete questionnaires about their quality of life as well. And all of that data that is then aggregated. We have a fully featured electronic trial master file or electronic data capture system, the same kind of robust technology that we've purposely adapted or customized, I should say, for our purposes, but it is a tool that is typically used in large clinical trials. We also have electronic health records that we use as well, and then we combine all of that data together into the Emerald real-world evidence data set that can be used for then multiple purposes here, as described in the chart. The kinds of insights we get are also on adverse events. So if you take a look at this, we can actually get deep insights into what adverse events are occurring in which patients, when in the treatment process do they occur, what is more likely to precipitate an adverse event, what are the appropriate remedies for that. Naturally, We don't expect many adverse events for this kind of treatment, but they do occur. There are drug-drug interactions. These drugs do interfere with other treatments the patients are on, and certainly can be severe enough to warrant stopping treatment. So this is not a perfectly safe drug. And so understanding that adverse event and that side effect profile is really important, especially important if you wish to register a medicine with a major regulator. This is one of the key questions they're there to help answer, which is, what is the safety profile of this treatment? And our data is quite unique in that respect. We're seeing a lot of really profound benefits for patients. Here's a story of a Vietnam veteran who came in many years of using a whole range of medications for his pain: OxyContin, buprenorphine, pregabalin. Maybe these don't mean much, but these are strong opioids. These are very strong pain medications that can have a whole range of quite unpleasant side effects. And this gentleman was on high doses of all these treatments. And after a few months of a cannabinoid treatment, he was able to reduce all his other treatments. And at the same time, while reducing these other drugs, he was able to lift scores or improve scores in these other tools that we use. So we could see that his pain was improving. It was interfering with his life less. He was less depressed, less anxious, and less stressed overall. And that's a really terrific outcome. And it's got our team thinking much more deeply about, we're not just here to treat the pain, we're also really here to treat the individual, improve their quality of life, understand what the health outcomes are, and we use that as part of our treatment and assessment as well. But we see lots of cases like Bob, and you've probably, if you have somebody that you know on medicinal cannabis or have read much about it, you know, there is plenty of anecdotal evidence, but anecdotal evidence won't help a product get registered. It won't convince a payer to suddenly cough up and pay for these drugs for everybody. And that's why we need to gather the stories like Bob into, you know, an evidence package that can change the minds of regulators and payers safely, and ultimately prescribers and benefit patients. If you don't do that well, if you're out there making claims about your drug without the evidence, then there are penalties that can come your way. In the UK and the US, major regulators taking a very firm stance on unsubstantiated claims. In the US, for example, following FDA warning letters are a number of legal class actions against companies making claims that their drugs are, or their products are medicines. And so one has to be just really careful about what they state. These regulators exist to keep the population safe, and unless the evidence is there to convince them otherwise, they will take a very firm view of this. If you do this right, however, like one company has demonstrated, GW Pharma, you can generate substantial revenues off a single product. They created $296 million US in a single year, and that in their last quarter was around $120 million US in a single quarter, which is far more than, by comparison, Canopy Growth's entire business, encompassing recreational and medicinal cannabis. And so even more remarkable is thinking that this is really only on a population of around 15,000 patients, and that the treatment itself is $32,500 a year, but 98% of payers in America will cover the cost of this treatment. Why? Because they've been able to produce very high quality clinical evidence supporting their product in that population. Quickly, here's a little comparison of other companies that are out there operating in the real world evidence space. Flatiron, I mentioned before. Verana Health, relatively new, looking at eye disease and neurology. Etion is looking at claims data, trying to convert that into real world evidence insights. And then you have Emerald Clinics, unique in that we have a clinical service. We're actually at the front line of care. We actually have doctors seeing and touching patients. That makes our feedback and our experience and our ability to respond to patient needs much much more appropriate. We're also able to control the clinical routines, which means we can ask new questions as they become interesting to us of our patient population. And that means our data quality is higher. And overall, what that means is that we can get very valuable insights at a much lower capital investment from our work. How do we make money? Where's the business generate revenue? So sponsors, which is a term for drug developers or therapy producers, pay us for insights to our evidence. They pay us either for a registry or a product registry or information about their product, which can be delivered on a regular basis, de-identified, of course. We also have performed a number of clinical trials as a complement to that real-world evidence as well. And of course, all our team come from trial background, so we can help with trial design, delivery, execution, recruitment of patients, and obviously the data of that. We're also making revenue on the patient side as well, although that's not our primary source of income. Patients pay us for delivering care, and they're engaged in that journey as well. So the two sides of business take care of themselves, with the evidence side being the big opportunity here. Just to give you a sense of kind of how a customer might evolve over time, often the engagements start with a single insight. Give me a snapshot of data here, show me what you've got, great. Once they're interested in that, they can come in and look for product-specific insights. Tell me everything you know about my product and how it's performing, or tell me everything you know about a particular disease that I'm interested in, and then maybe let's do a clinical trial as well. And if you can gather all of this evidence, then you can end up with a registration here, and then ultimately get into post-market surveillance as well. Where we're at today, we've got 4 clinics around Australia, as I mentioned, Perth, Melbourne, Sydney, and in the Northern Rivers on the border of New South Wales and Queensland. We're still exploring a London clinic, and that's on track. We have a number of partners, and even in an age of COVID, we've still been able to progress those conversations, and we're very pleased about that. Impact of COVID-19, worth mentioning this, and I talked about this a little bit previously. It probably accelerated our shift to telehealth, but we've been able to adapt very quickly. We now have almost 100% of our consultations and follow-ups delivered on telehealth. We're able to open up both our trial master file, electronic health record, and invite the patient to complete their questionnaires ahead of time. This has meant we've rolled out electronic consenting as well. And we've actually had really positive responses from patients about the experience here, and from our doctors as well. We've also evolved this to COVID symptom monitoring. You can probably appreciate that COVID has played out. We're still unsure of which treatments are best for this disease, and when to prescribe those treatments, or when to deliver them. And so that's really telling that we haven't been able to, despite the large number of patients affected with this disease, it's been very difficult to divine high quality treatment insights or clinical guidelines on this patient population. And that speaks to sort of the fracturing of the healthcare system and the siloed way that data's captured now. And so we see an opportunity there. We've developed a monitoring service for our patients, and we're in a number of conversations with various groups around the world actually, around doing symptom monitoring and a little bit more for patients with COVID, because it's a perfect use case to demonstrate the power of real world evidence in action. And then finally here, I'll just touch on the highlights from our Q1, which 4C was released yesterday, a couple of days ago. We raised just in middle of February. We've appointed Professor Sir John Took to our board, who is a world thought leader on learning health systems, and he himself a very accomplished clinician. We're able to accelerate a clinical trial for Zilira. So after some time on a study, we joined and got 70% of the patients within a number of weeks. Again, a testament to our data platform and the engagement we have with our patient population. We launched the COVID monitoring symptom service I mentioned before, and we've invested heavily in our data assets by engaging Diamond Cyber and Three Springs Technology. These are a cybersecurity company and an artificial intelligence company, respectively, to enhance the security and the value of our data assets. A lot of work goes on behind the scenes, making our data pipeline robust, secure, and valuable, and set up in such a way to help us yield insights. That's what we've been working on pretty heavily, with more good things to come soon. Here's our board. Just to touch on that, Stuart Wash has listed a number of companies. He's taken drugs through development before. He's currently chairman at OrthoCell, which some of you may have heard of. It's myself with a background in clinical trials in big data companies across the US. Dr. Alistair Vickery was a professor of medicine at UWA, and he leads our clinical team. Matt Callahan, who's based in the United States, has worked with OrthoCell. He's also taken a number of drugs through FDA approval. And Professor Sir John Took, I should say, I've been taught that the order is actually that direction. You don't lose the Sir title, you have it for life, but you can lose a professorship. But Professor Sir John Took is with us as well. And in addition to his terrific clinical and academic research background, he's also, he was a board member at Bupa International on a review board for Google DeepMind, and heavily connected to a number of interesting health innovation groups around the UK as well. So I'm happy to leave it there and take questions. Laura, if you like.
Good stuff. Thank you so much, Michael. We do have a couple of questions for you. You mentioned the case studies, and you highlighted one of those case studies for us, which was great. Can you broadly speak to some of the other trends and examples that you're seeing with patients besides Bob?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing of remarkable note is that, we ask about quality of life despite the indications that patients are coming to see us for. And I should just touch on that for a moment. We see, we've had well over 1,000 patients now. About 70% come for chronic non-cancer pain. And so there could be a lot of reasons for that pain: failed back surgery, inflammatory bowel disease, multiple sclerosis, really rich and diverse patient population just on for seeking treatment for their pain management. Then we have about 15% of our patients are cancer patients, either in palliative care in the final stages of the disease or looking for relief from side effects of treatment. And then there's a very long tail covering post-traumatic stress disorder, neurodegenerative disease, a very long tail, a very broad range of conditions that we've treated for. And for all of those groups, we're paying attention to many quality of life measures, and invariably we're seeing very large improvements in sleep quality, anxiety, stress, and depression. And for those cohorts with the most severe pain history, they tend to have a very good result and certainly we see quite strong reductions in uses of opioids in that group as well. Often, though, we might get reports of improvements in irritable bowel syndrome, even though their primary presenting condition might be their pain. And so it's not clear exactly, it's not always obvious, I guess, exactly where the benefits will come for each individual patient. I guess that's part of the interest that we have in collecting this evidence. Broadly speaking, yeah, lots of quality of life improvements, and certainly for those with pain, a majority of our patients, we're seeing a good improvement for those patients too. Yeah.
And the company is a data play, and as you pointed out, it's unique in that way where not many of the players in your space are actually playing with data like you guys are. So do you think it could also be fair to say that a lack of data has slowed down what once was a booming sector? As we saw in the last couple of years, the medicinal cannabis sector was flying on the ASX as well, and it has slowed down in the last 6 months or so.
Absolutely, yeah. I think absolutely. I mean, our belief is that a lack of evidence has created that bottleneck. It's that evidence gap in the early diagram that people perhaps overlooked or maybe didn't see would have such a big effect. They thought by simply maybe applying enough pressure politically or directly to the public that we would open up the market. What they've found is, though, if you're still going through the gatekeepers, the regulators, the payers, and ultimately the prescribing doctors between drug and patient, those groups want to see evidence. They want to be reassured that what they're prescribing or recommending follows best practice. And so I think we've got a glut of product. We certainly see that in Canada with large stores of inventory that haven't moved through, because the expectation that the medicinal cannabis market would explode just didn't eventuate. And I think, you know, one of the ways we can address that is by collating this evidence, clarifying which treatments work in which population, and getting those products registered and ultimately covered by payers, because there's very big out-of-pocket costs right now. And then ultimately using that to you know, convince more conservative medical professionals that this should be a tool in their armory for patients.
Yeah, so yeah, just to reiterate, I guess real world evidence comes first, and that precedes everything else. So it should, in your view, in this space.
That's right. Well, yeah, real world evidence can accelerate the generation of these insights, and I should say as well, this doesn't just apply to medicinal cannabis. There are many products out there where real world evidence could make a difference. It could either expand the number of indications that are currently approved, or yield new insights into how treatments are working. You know, there's been probably a number of public and high-profile examples of a drug where a secondary effect was discovered somewhat accidentally once it was out in the public, for good or for worse. But you know, if we're paying attention, we're more likely to find these insights.
Thanks very much, Michael. Great to have you on board today.
Okay, cheers, pleasure. Thank you.
Talk to you later. Next up, we have Invex Therapeutics. Stay tuned. Invex is a biopharmaceutical company focused on the repurposing of an already approved drug. We'll leave it there, as we'll be returning in 5 minutes to explain more.